First and foremost, I want to say that I appreciate the efforts of my colleagues on council and those of the administration made daily to navigate the uncharted waters of the impacts of COVID-19 and the pandemic. Concerns are growing for our residents and businesses, which is why it is vital for City Hall to maintain business continuity that provides stabilization to our economy. Now, I'm not here to complain or highlight errors in the presented material, and I'm not here to simply oppose the leadership. I'm asking for a chance to do my job, to work with others in making positive differences. I just want to help my city, neighbors, friends, and family through this storm. Following the same old solutions would be dangerous. After conversations with residents, small business owners, community organizations, and executives from corporations in our city, I commonly heard, what is the city's plan? Many in Winnipeg are worried about the future and want to have confidence in our decisions. The three scenarios provided are not financial plans, they are estimates and worst case scenarios. And I don't believe they provided specific actions or defined strategic milestones that would launch the particular initiatives. The three scenarios were not discussed or debated by all members of council. There was no opportunity to offer alternatives prior to being introduced to the public. They were done at a different time and a different place without us. I offered suggestions in a letter on March 19th, the day before the budget vote at council. That was over a month ago, and since then I have provided suggestions and I've asked repeatedly to be included. Instead, I was heard and told to send more emails. The motion was simply to gather ideas that day at council. As it turns out, those apparent ideas are actually the plan that we're looking at. I know the chair has said the developed plan reflects input from councillors, including myself. The chair will say the plan reflects actions on at least three of my ideas put forward with Councillor Nason in particular. Reducing discretional spending is one that will be noted. My suggestion was much more than reducing discretional spending. I propose to stop all non-essential spending. Another suggestion was to freeze all fleet purchases, which would save $15 million in 2020. The current plan appears to only be asking for a reduction in fleet services. The city is freezing non-union salaries. Fantastic. However, given 5 of our administration make nearly $1.8 million, I suggested that we freeze salaries for non-union employees at 2019 levels before this year's raises were implemented. I've since offered a sliding scale of reductions for all salaries. We've had no discussion on the proposed $50 million in savings, which is 2/3 of the projected shortfall that the city is predicting. I also suggested that we immediately put transit on a Saturday or a Sunday schedule, 39 days. And after losing $6 million, the mayor finally considers it and implements a Saturday schedule, which still doesn't begin immediately and will result in a few more $1 million lost. Also, why did we open the SRT after many suggested we should not? We spent thousands and thousands of dollars on advertising, and we have less than 20% ridership. All financial decisions should be scrutinized by each member of council. Now, more than ever, it's important to be open to new ideas. We need to be open to other potential solutions from everyone. And I know the chair has said we've had a council seminar and a council briefing on the economic scenario analysis and cash flow management plan. Everyone was able to ask questions, get input, and discuss the content. Well, these are the facts. The presentation itself took about an hour to present, and that left just under an hour for 15 people to ask questions of a financial plan with millions in implications, and we were all seeing it for the very first time, with no time allowed to scrutinize before the meeting. Is that what everyone means by everyone is involved? I don't think so. I'm simply asking for a chance to do my job. That's why I wanted to be here. I want to make a difference to help our city through this, not just be a cheerleader for something and vote yes because I haven't been involved in it. I haven't been involved in the development of it, and I want to be a part of what we do in the best interest of our city. The chair has said the plan is on the SPC finance agenda to allow others to speak, and the plan will be discussed at committee. And let's be honest with taxpayers and the media, as a delegation, we're not allowed to ask questions. The chair and others on the committee can ask questions of the delegation, but the delegation cannot ask questions of them or the administration. Why? These meetings are consent agendas, and despite what is fed to taxpayers, this means that the meeting is closed and controlled. It has been said many times, you're new to council and you should understand things are done differently at City Hall. Well, the fact is I do understand that it's done differently at City Hall, and that's the problem. We can do better. With respect to this, this process lacks democratic debate or even pre-decision discussions. This plan is not an acceptable financial plan. It is politically controlled, engineered narrative for media. A weekly confidential meeting to tell us what has been decided, followed by a press release the same day, is insufficient. For this leadership to continue to stand before residents and claim that all members of council are involved, well, it's misleading. If it were me, I would ask every council member to take a role in a working group focused on specific options and areas of concern for our city and residents. The administration, EPC, and this leadership doesn't believe they need or want our involvement. This is our chance to make positive change for the city, to actually start working together, improving the policies and implementing low-cost, low-risk actions. Residents need to be assured that elected officials at City Hall are managing their tax dollars appropriately. We can achieve this through improved processes, discussion, and debate, and we can start now. Let's proceed together with a concentrated and reasonable approach in the reduction of non-essential expenses while simultaneously developing a strategy that will relaunch our local economy. All we've done to date for residents is put payments on hold. How is that helping our taxpayers or businesses? We can help and we can be fiscally responsible at the same time, but not the way that we're doing it now, not behind closed doors. In closing, I appreciate that we have differing opinions and we share various issues and concerns. And I don't blame any one person. I've learned over the years working through fiscal management crises that properly utilizing the skills and talents of those around you is the path to success. And I believe we can get on that path. And all I'm asking for is a chance to do my job, to make a positive difference and to help my city through this storm. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Klein. Any questions at all for the councillor? Councillor Nason.
Sorry, I put myself on mute so I didn't disrupt anybody speaking. Thank you, Councillor Klein, for your presentation. I know you and I have many conversations over, how the city could be better operated or more efficient. Can you speak to what the impact will be on these deferred payments once that bill does come due?
I can't speak personally, but I can tell you what I have heard from small business owners, and not all of them, but some, and what I've heard from some of our landlords of malls and small strip malls. And that is that in 3 months, depending on how soon we get back to business and how much federal funding they actually will be approved for, it could be the deciding factor in whether or not a business does reopen. The predictions across the country and here in Winnipeg that I'm hearing is at least 1 in 10 businesses will take this opportunity to close. It's too stressful and they will find a different path. And of course, we know that the hospitality industry is taking the biggest hit. But I've also learned in these conversations that some large retailers will be reevaluating stores during this time and looking at what is best for them. So my concern, and I'm not saying this is for certain, of course, but my concern based on talking to others and listening to what they have to say is that we're making it more we're giving them the opportunity, or we're presenting them with a wall that may end or result in closing of a business.
Okay. On the prospect of fleet services, you mentioned that they're only doing a portion instead of all of the suspension of spending. Do you have an understanding as to what they are spending money on?
Well, no, we haven't been, or I haven't been. I can't speak for all members of council, but I haven't been given the list of what we are or are not spending on, or what positions or exactly are on hold with the hiring freeze and such, which I acknowledge was part of the discussion and letter that we put forward. It would be nice to know that information. It's very difficult, and that's my concern with this, is it's very difficult to vote yes and to support council, which is what we're here to do, but you can't do that if you're not a part of it, if you're left out and you're in a, it feels like you're in a different area or a different atmosphere, because these decisions are happening. They're being brought to us under the guise of we're including you. But I don't know what led to that decision. I don't know what detail or what supporting documents they have, and where the discussion led. Why did they reach those items that they identified? When are those items launched, and how do we know when they're launched, other than we'll be told? And I find that I cannot do the job that residents want me to do anyways, because I'm not given that opportunity.
Okay. The last question I'll have for you, and it's kind of an open one, is with regards to federal bailout. There seems to last week be a strong concentration on depending on the federal government to fix our finances. I believe on the operational side is where the main crux is looking for. What do you see as the problem if we're dependent on yet another level of government to bail us out, when at the end it's only one taxpayer that pays the bill?
Well, it's a valid point, but at the same time, we have to look to our federal government for support, as they are doing right now with residents and businesses alike. At the end of the day, though, we will have to pay all that back, and we will need to be asking for more at each level of government from the same person. And I'm not opposed to asking for that, and I'm not opposed to keeping our capital projects going and keeping development in our communities going. But we've slowed that down, and we're kind of sitting on this fence waiting and saying we're just going to take money from our reserve fund. We are making some steps to save dollars, but we are, and if you look at the three scenarios before you, a lot of it comes from the reserve fund. I had questions about that, and maybe it's something you can ask, is why in the examples does it say we'll experience a $41 million hit if it ends by July 31st, but if it ends a month later, we actually take less of a hit? Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't know if it's the math is wrong or they're going to explain it in a different way, but just looking at it, it appears that we're saying it hurts us less by going longer. So I think we could help everybody by reducing those non-essential spends. We could reduce, buying $15 million in fleet vehicles. We could stop buying $8 million in buses, and we could do our part and reduce the amount of money that the federal government would have to give us, as they are everybody else, which in turn reduces the impact on taxpayers and residents, who are our residents.
Yep. Thank you.
I have a question for Councillor.
Go ahead, Councillor Gilroy.
I just want some clarity, because in your detailed speech that you just delivered, you talked about that there were lots of things that were your ideas that were taken into account here, that they implemented your ideas.
Sorry, there was three.
But then you're talking about that that people aren't listening to your ideas. So I just wanted to get clarity on, because a lot of councillors might argue that some of your suggestions were yours. I know that there's been a lot of chat through the email, and a lot of people have made comments and suggestions. So I just want some clarity on what you're saying here.
That's fair enough, Councillor Gilroy. What I had said is that, and if you looked at the email that was sent out on I think it was Friday, late Friday by the chair, it talked about the scenarios and the plan that is before you today in the committee, in fact, included 3 suggestions made from the letter of the March 19th date in 2020. My response was yes and no. Again, fairly generic statement. I was looking for more in-depth action as opposed to kind of a high-level a view on it and a smaller reduction, because these were areas I felt, and along with Councillor Nason, that we could reduce quickly without really impacting residents to a great degree, and start working towards saving. So yes, I acknowledge that 3 of them were in there, but I talked about what those are. What the differences were between what was suggested and what was actually implemented, so that there was clarity, not only to that email, but to others.
Councillor Chambers?
Yeah, Councillor Klein, thank you for your presentation this morning. And again, you can agree, or we can agree to disagree, or agree to agree that these are very unfamiliar times, not only to our public service, but to us as city councillors, and indeed at the federal and provincial levels as well. And there's really no playbook in place that kind of dictates how we proceed going forward. You have made some recommendations or presented some ideas. I just want to drill down a little bit deeper in terms of what you feel are non-essential spending that are still occurring.
Well, I'll go back to Councillor Nason's response or question, and my response to his question. We don't know exactly, unless some members of council are privy to it, but it would be impossible, as far as I know, for any of us to say exactly what the non-essential spending items are. And if, again, we turn to the email that we all received, it talks about discretionary spending. Is there a difference between discretionary and non-essential spending? Well, it depends. Some people believe that there is, and some might say that there's not. So I guess that's a personal opinion. I believe there is a difference between discretionary and non-essential. And I believe what we were told is that we've instructed departments to reduce their discretionary spending as much as possible, as opposed to saying we're in difficult times. This spending line is not available to you at this time. We need to find out how this all pans out in the next every 2 weeks or every month. I'd say every month is too late, but to look at their financials and be able to say this is a problem. An example of that, Councillor Chambers, is, and if I may, the transit. We've had discussions as a group about transit, and we had requested information. Some of that information was not sent to us, but it was delivered to media. A couple of councillors had spoken about that and about their frustration. But days before, I had requested that we all receive comparables. Tell us how much revenue we're losing on a weekly basis, this year compared to last year, so we can really see what the numbers are, as we're hearing we were being told various different percentages. But then I've never received that. I don't know if anybody else has, but then of course we're talking in the media about how it's costing us $6 million. And when the question is asked, well, is that revenue? Well, it's a mixture of revenue and expenses. Okay, well, do you have more detail on that? Well, we'll look at that. So it's very hard to be involved or to sign a document or by casting a vote and supporting it when the basic information in a financial analysis is not available to you. And that's what I mean about doing my job. Being a councillor has obligations to me, and what I told residents is the biggest obligation, that I would be asking questions that aren't normally asked, and that I would hold people accountable. That doesn't mean you have to be mean or rude, but you have to ask the questions. You have to get that information so that you are spending the residents' money properly and according to their desires. But we can't do that when we don't have that information.
But to Councillor Gilroy's point, those questions have been asked by the majority of councillors on council with respect to transit, with respect to the non-essential spending. We've asked those questions as well in an effort to look at our revenues in terms of what comes in through tax supported, what comes in through fines, what comes in through licensing and things like that. And then looking at our expenditures and where we can reduce and also looking at the impact of services to citizens, recognizing that, the majority of people are staying at home, are self-isolating, and so again, in terms of the services that are normal to us without a pandemic are minimally impacted.
You have a question?
Yeah, so
fair enough, and I would agree with you, Councillor Chambers, that people have been asking the questions. So, I mean, the question to me was, what are those expenses? And I don't think you or I or some others on the committee or on council could tell you exactly where cuts are being made and in what departments, or where there are other opportunities to cut services. I believe we turned to the administration to give us a presentation, and we're told that this is the best approach. We don't have that opportunity to sit down and look at it with them. We don't have that. We don't have working groups for every major department. We don't have working groups to look at services that are essential or non-essential. Why wouldn't we have a working group? I would do that immediately. Working groups are what you normally, or what most would normally implement when you go into your emergency measures. You have working groups to deal with the current issue, with what's happening, with looking at the future, and looking at new practices and new business obligations because of your crisis. We don't have working groups, and that's what I would like to see, so that we can answer your question. Maybe you're privy to that information, but I'm not. And I would venture to say that if I was to sit down with you and say, okay, what expenses in this department have they cut, we wouldn't know.
thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Klein.
Thank you, Councillor Gillingham.